This week's story is Understanding Isaiah, and it comes from Isaiah 41, verse 10, and Isaiah 42, verses 6 through 7. We know that there are major and minor prophets. They are divided this way because of how much their writings we have. In the grouping called the major prophets, one of those prophets is Isaiah. The others are Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and depending on who discusses it, Daniel and/or Lamentations are also involved. Today we are going to learn more about Isaiah. The book of Isaiah is generally divided into 3 sections, and most scholars believe that it was not written all at one time or all by the same person. Why this can be a surprise to many, the biblical writers, and in fact many writers of the time, would write in the style of another to continue the work and as a compliment for the original person. Isaiah was a prophet. Prophets are foretellers. They speak on behalf of the poor. They are future predictors, messengers for God, ones who listen and hear God's call. They reveal the truth, are risk takers, reluctant of common origin, and know the past. To know if a prophet is true, the words must reconcile with what we already know about God from our history and our past. Isaiah is commonly divided into 3 sections representing 3 different time periods in the life of the Israelites of the kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom that began after the kingdom of Israel was divided. Isaiah 1 through 39 is called First Isaiah. This section is called the Isaiah of Jerusalem, the Isaiah before the kingdom of Judah was conquered. It is this part of Isaiah that speaks of the judgment of the people and of future restoration. It also speaks of preparing for whatever God calls us to do, prepared and willing, even when we know it will not be easy, because God rarely calls us to easy tasks, but does promise that God will be with us through it all. Deutero-Isaiah is the name given to 2nd Isaiah, which covers chapters 40 through 55. This Isaiah is of the exile in Babylon, the Isaiah of the hopeful return that continued to cling to the image that things could be better if. Lastly, 3rd Isaiah, also known as Trito-Isaiah, covers chapters 56 through 66. This last section of Isaiah is the Isaiah of the return. The people had been exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon, and when the Persians conquered the Babylonians, they allowed the Hebrews to return to their homeland. This return was not easy as life and time had moved on. But this section of Isaiah promises future restoration to the people weary of the rebuilding process. It also provides a new understanding that God's love extends beyond Israel. These 3 sections come together to give us Isaiah. The role of Isaiah and all the prophets is not necessarily to be right, but rather to be the voice of God to the people of that time, telling them things even if they did not want to hear them, and challenging them to envision God's shalom, God's peace, as not a reality, but certainly as a possibility. How do we know if a prophet is true? If you had to give a prophecy about the future of your church, what would it be?